Did Jesus offer credible credentials to back up his divine claims? Well, I believe the evidence is overwhelming that he did. Now, I'll just mention quickly 4 categories of this confirming information. First, his miracles. Jesus said something very interesting in John chapter 10, verse 37. He said, "Don't believe me unless I do miracles of God." In other words, he was saying miracles would be strong confirmation to his identity. In fact, hundreds of years before the first Christmas, the prophet Isaiah said miracles would be one way the Messiah would authenticate himself. So Jesus performed many miraculous feats in broad daylight, oftentimes in front of skeptics. He demonstrated power over nature by walking on water. He demonstrated power over sickness by healing leprosy and blindness. He demonstrated power over death by raising Lazarus from the dead. In fact, Jesus' opponents never denied that he performed miracles. In fact, the ancient Jewish writings called the Talmud, even though they say negative things about Jesus, the Talmud concedes, admits that he dealt in the supernatural. Even Muhammad, the founder of Islam, admitted that Jesus performed the miraculous, and by the way, that Jesus also was born of a virgin. The second credential of Jesus is his character. You know, so often, the closer we get to other people, the more we see their flaws. When I was a reporter at the Chicago Tribune, and I would, spend time with politicians or celebrities and so forth, the closer I would get to them, the more I would see that they have shortcomings just like everybody else. And yet, amazingly, the opposite is what happened for those who knew Jesus. The closer they got to him, the more they marveled at his moral perfection. For instance, nobody was closer to Jesus during his ministry than John and Peter. They saw Jesus up close and personal 24/7 virtually. So what was their assessment of Jesus' character? John wrote in 1 John 3 verse 5, "In him is no sin." And Peter said in 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 22, "He committed no sin and no deceit was found in his mouth." And how many of us would have that said about us of people who are close to us? None of us would. And yet, this righteous character of Jesus is confirmed by those who are closest to him. And it is another credential of him being who he claimed to be. The third credential that Jesus offered was the way he fit the fingerprint of divine prophecy. You see, the Old Testament of the Bible contains dozens of specific ancient predictions or prophecies about the coming Messiah who would be sent by God to be the Savior of Israel and the world. In effect, what these prophecies did is they formed a fingerprint that only the Messiah would be able to match. And that way, everyone would know, be able to rule out the false messiahs and go to the only one, Jesus, who fit the fingerprint. For instance, it was predicted hundreds of years in advance that the Messiah would be born of a virgin, of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Judah, of the house of David. He would be born in Bethlehem, heralded by the Lord's messenger. He would cleanse the temple. He would be rejected by the religious leaders. He would be killed at a specific time in history, predicted hundreds of years in advance. In fact, the Old Testament of the Bible contains a description of Jesus Christ being crucified hundreds of years before crucifixion was even implemented as a method of execution by the Romans. So Jesus fits this fingerprint, unlike anybody else. Now, I used to think that, well, maybe a way to explain this is that Jesus intentionally maneuvered his life in such a way as to, pretend to fulfill these predictions and fool people into thinking he's the Messiah. So maybe like when he was getting ready to go into Jerusalem, he told his disciples, look, go find me a donkey, because Zechariah 9:9 says the Messiah is going to ride a donkey into Jerusalem, and I'm really anxious to fool him to think I'm the Messiah so I can be tortured to death here. So would you go get me a donkey so I can fool everybody? I thought maybe that kind of explained it away. But then I saw that, gosh, there's a whole bunch of these prophecies that there's no way Jesus could have intentionally fulfilled. How could he arrange for his place of birth or his ancestry? Or how he was betrayed for a specific amount of money? Or how his bones would be unbroken on the cross, unlike the other two people who were executed with him, and whose bones were broken by the Roman soldiers. There's just too many of these prophecies that Jesus could not intentionally have fulfilled. And he certainly could not have fulfilled them merely by coincidence. I mean, the odds are too great against that. Dr. Peter Stoner was a college professor of mathematics, gathered 600 college students in mathematics, and they came up with their best estimate of the probability of 48 of these ancient prophecies coming true in any human being throughout the ages. And then they just ran the calculations. And what they determined is the mathematical odds of any human being fulfilling just 48 of these ancient prophecies would be one chance in a trillion. These are long odds. These are very long. These make the lottery look like a sure thing. I mean, this would be the equivalent of blindfolding somebody and having them find one predetermined atom in a trillion billion universes the size of our universe. So the odds of anybody fulfilling these prophecies were absolutely astronomical. And yet Jesus said he came to fulfill them. Luke 24:44, he said, all things which were written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms must be fulfilled. And they were, and they are being fulfilled only in him. So all throughout history, the only individual to fit this fingerprint is the baby in the manger.